You are now tuned in to the Storm Tracker podcast.
Welcome back, Canes family, to the Storm Tracker podcast. I'm Marcus Benjamin, representing for CanesCounty.com, part of the Rivals.com network. Make sure you subscribe to this podcast on all platforms and also subscribe to this YouTube channel live from Canes County. Also, most importantly, subscribe to the website, CanesCounty.com, for free. Use the promo code Miami30. This is the edition where we call Scouting the Opponent, where we kind of talk about Miami's upcoming football opponent and really just kind of learn about who the Hurricanes are playing this week. And I have joining me today Kelly Quinlan from Bulls Insider, also part of the Rivals.com network, to talk Miami versus USF. Thanks for joining me today, Kelly.
Happy to be on, Marcus.
Awesome. So first off, just kind of want to talk about the feel of the program, just kind of the feel of what you've heard from the press conferences this week. There's been a lot of chatter online, social media about, maybe, different accounts that are kind of, talking a little smack here and there about the Hurricanes or the Hurricanes crowd or whatever. But yeah, what's the sense of the program just kind of going into this game? I know it's being built up as a big one for the Bulls.
Yeah, I think they feel like so they played Alabama, to one score for 54 minutes or whatever it was in that game. And I think the idea is that they feel like they can play with anyone when their offense is rolling and the defense is playing okay. That's a fair assessment. I think they're pretty good offensively when they're rolling. I think the big question to me this week is, how does USF's defense, kind of slow down Miami and Cam Ward and all that and the offense? And then is Byrum Brown able to throw the football and move the ball successfully? He's run really well throughout the season. He just hasn't been consistent, especially on deep shots so far. I think he's like 1 for 9 or something on deep balls this season. So those are the things because I think you're going to need to hit a couple of those. I think USF fans have got a little of their swagger back with Golish. Golish has a little swag about him too. That's fun in a different way than like a Willie Taggart or Jim Levitt or some of the, those guys. I think that Golish is just very, like, he was pissed they lost the Alabama game. He felt like they should have won the game. And I think the fans are enjoying that you have a coach like that that's not looking for moral victories or whatever. And they're still in a pretty big rebuild. Like, was a bad team that he took over, and he has rebuilt it brick by brick, and they're recruiting well, and they brought in some good transfers that's kind of overhauled their defense a lot, especially in the secondary. So I think there's a level of confidence in, with Miami. It's like, do you know what they are? They played probably one of the top 3 worst teams in the FBS in Ball State, and then obviously we all know what Florida is right now. It's a dumpster fire. So like,
Yeah.
it's hard to gauge, right? Like, and they played Alabama well, so maybe that gives them some extra confidence. I don't know. I'm like super curious to see what this game looks like, though. I have no idea what to expect, and obviously, Miami has just been so inconsistent, and these whenever they've been in this opportunity to kind of start to pull away and show that they're back, it just hasn't happened over the last 20 something years. So like, I think a lot of people are waiting for that moment to happen too. And it looks like they have a great team this year. I'm expecting a really interesting game. I would not pick USF to win it right now, but like, I could see it being a very competitive game if they can do those things I mentioned at the top.
Yeah, I'm very curious to see how this game will turn out as well. Obviously, it was easy for Miami to get up for Florida for the season opener, but this is going to have a different type of feel because USF is not a ranked team. Obviously, Florida wasn't either, but there's a rivalry there. I don't really say that this is a rivalry by any stretch, even though they're only 4 hours apart, these two teams. But yeah, it'll be very interesting to kind of see how this game plays out, the energy that the Bulls kind of come out with for this game, the energy that will be in the building at Raymond James Stadium from the crowd. I'm curious to see what that will be like. I am traveling up to Tampa, and I will be up in that stadium for the first time for me. So I'm excited to really kind of see what goes down Saturday night. I did want to ask about that Alabama game. You kind of referenced it a couple of times um, at the top of the show here, and also their last win against Southern Miss. Now, first, Alabama, I think everybody kind of knows that USF played them tough again for the second year in a row. It's not like USF snuck up on Bama. Bama, I'm pretty sure, was well aware of what happened last year. Yet they were able to still give them a game up to three quarters, and then Alabama was able to pull away. Last week, they were better offensively. When it came to Southern Miss, obviously a lesser opponent there. But when you watch both games here, especially starting with Alabama, what went right and what went wrong against the Tide?
So I think there were two different things that helped them in the Alabama game. One is that they were playing pretty well defensively. They created some opportunities, created turnovers, forced some fumbles. There was a long kick return they gave up that where they stripped the ball out. There were a couple of big plays, but the biggest thing that really helped them in that game was I think there were like 8 holding penalties on Alabama's offensive line that wiped out a bunch of big plays for them. And there were kind of some of them were blatant, some of them were more borderline, like. But a lot of that's I've noticed in the however many games I've watched this year, that there's a real emphasis seems to be on holding calls this year from the officials in a lot of the games I've watched. There's been a lot of borderline calls where people have been pancaked and it's been called a hold or whatever on the edge by somebody. There's been a lot of that kind of taking away some big plays. So that helped them out a lot, put Bama behind the sticks quite a bit. And that was Bama's fault. They had self-inflicted wounds there. And then, the offense, the biggest thing that killed them in that game was Byrum Brown just was struggling to throw the football.
Hmm.
And he had several open opportunities at scores. They got bottled up in the red zone and had to kick field goals. And that's how the game stayed close. Um, at the end of the day, though, they just kind of gave up the rope at the end, and in the final 6 minutes of the game, got blown out, gave up 3 long scores that were just bad effort plays and stuff. So I think that came into it. Then they were hung over going into the Southern Miss game. The Southern Miss game, they were down 14-0, and outscored them 49-10 or something the rest of the game. Shut them down totally. So they've been good at creating turnovers, wreaking some havoc. They got after the quarterback in the Alabama game. They got after the guy at Southern Miss. I think that's been in a big area of improvement for them this year. And if the defense plays well, Golish's offense with the tempo and everything can move the ball. They have 3 really good running backs. So, sometimes they could even get to a 4 deep situation with the way Byrum Brown plays. He's kind of like a running back there. So, the trio of Naquan Wright, Kelly Joyner, and Teron Keith has been really, really big for them. I think the biggest thing they were kind of looking for is whoever the go-to guy is at outside receiver position. I'm not sure that that's there yet. Sean Atkins, their slot's really good. So I think that they have a good offense. They have a good game plan. Golish is from that Josh Heupel tree where they're very good at finding ways to get their playmakers in space to have one-on-one matchups. And how does Miami deal with that? Are they able to get to Byron Brown? Are they able to slow down that running game? That's what this will come down to, I think, a lot for Miami as well.
Yeah, I think anybody who kind of knows a little bit about USF knows about Byron Brown. I think this quarterback is probably one of the more dynamic quarterbacks in the country, just with his running ability. But you mentioned that he needs to improve himself when it comes to passing the football. So when you kind of watched him from last year and then also this year, what truly kind of, I guess, makes him dangerous, and what would you pinpoint are his biggest struggles?
So I think he's willing to take what the defense is giving him. He's one of those quarterbacks. If it's not there, he's looking at the window quickly. He's going to just take off and run. And he's not scared to run through people. He sometimes probably takes some hits he shouldn't take. Doesn't necessarily get down when he should, but he's not afraid to like just improvise and try to make a play there. I think he throws the ball in the first that on the screens and also in that first 10-yard window really well as most quarterbacks in the country. He gets in a little trouble as it gets down the field in the numbers, and then on the deep throws, he's been really struggling this year. They only have, I think, one true deep shot that they've connected on this year. I think he's 1 for 9 this year on those. So you'd like to see that get a little better. Those are obviously the NFL level throws. And people forget too, he's still a young guy who's coming in, and he's just really gifted as an athlete. And it was a guy that was overlooked as a recruit by a lot of people at a school in North Carolina that had a lot of talented players. People just kind of thought he was a system guy, and that was what it was. And I think that he has taken a lot of that to heart to be the leader of the team, the heart and soul of them. And so I think he brings a lot of kind of X factors to it too. He has that kind of that willingness to win, and that's something you need to see from quarterbacks. And I think that that's what can make a guy special. If the team believes in him, they can rally behind him, and Byrum Brown definitely has that.
Awesome. Sounds like you're talking about Cam Ward a little bit, the way that you described Byrum Brown when it comes to leadership and the players really kind of buying in. That's something that Cam Ward has really kind of, had, I guess, once he stepped on campus and became a Miami Hurricane. He really kind of stepped into this leadership role for them. And that, of course, is important at the quarterback position. Now, last year, I want to tell you, Kelly, I covered the USF bowl game
Yeah,
last
you're
year.
at Boca Bowl. I saw you there.
Right. And it was an experience, I could say, just because with the amount of plays that
Oh, it's
USF
insane. Yeah.
ran, it was just unbelievable. Just the amount of plays that they ran. Of course, it was a blowout win for the Bulls on that day. Very good performance by them, but I was absolutely exhausted after during that game. It felt like there was a rain delay, like it felt like there was some kind of lightning delay for this game, because I want to say that game was probably close to maybe 4.5 hours. That's what it
Yeah,
felt.
it was brutal. And a lot of their games were like that last year, that where they're running 90 plays or something, and it's like, oh my god, like this is so long. The Western Kentucky game, this opened their season, they lost up at Western Kentucky last year. I went and covered that game. It was like the longest college football game that I've ever been to that didn't have a weather delay, including like I've covered games with multiple overtimes and all that stuff.
Right.
And like it was just, I mean, there's probably 200 plays in that game or something. Like it was totally insane.
Yeah.
And he does not pump the brakes that much. A lot of coaches try to slow things down or change gears or whatever, and he is not about that. He wants to run, and you see it too. He worked for Josh Heupel, Tennessee last week. They beat the tar out of Kent State, maybe it was.
Yeah.
Forget what it was. And it was like whatever it was, 65-0 at the half, whatever the score.
Yeah.
I mean, it's
That's
something insane. Yeah, and like they didn't. I don't think they shortened the quarters either or something after halftime. Like, and they like had an onside kick, and they're up 30-0 an onside kick because that was a check down look, I guess, where they just automatically onside kicked. And like, that's what his background is. He's like, they're going to be relentless, and so sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. The biggest thing it can do in a negative way is at times it puts a lot of pressure on your defense. If you go three and out. And so
right.
that's the struggle with it. And there were a few times where I would have liked to maybe see him pull back a little. But I understand this is what USF football is about. And we're going to play like this. And our guys are trained like that. And we're going to sub and do all that on defense to make it up. And now that they have a little bit of depth on defense, I think it's working out better for them. I'm not sure. I haven't looked at their pace of play this year in comparison to last year. Everyone's down a little bit just from the clock changes.
Yeah.
I've noticed maybe like 3 to 4 less possessions per game so far in the games I've covered. But they've been pretty good, and it's they're a challenge, and they're definitely not. This ain't Jeff Scott's USF or whatever.
Right.
They ran 87 plays at Southern Miss last week, so
Yeah.
that's a lot for right now. That's as high as I've probably seen this year.
Yeah, I'm sure you're exhausted kind of watching that, and I'm sure both you and I will be exhausted by the end of the night when it all is said and done with these two schools. But just do you see this up-tempo offense really benefiting the Bulls? I guess you could say, have you seen it really kind of wear teams down? And I guess what I'm asking is like if a team were to combat that, I would guess that they would have to establish a running game, so they can kind of grind it out and eat up clock and everything like that. Do you find that's kind of the way to beat the Bulls?
I think it is an effective way to counter them, but you have to be consistent in being able to drive the football. And a lot of these teams that I've seen over the years that go at turbo, basically as we call it, like um, the coaches can sometimes get frustrated by that if a team holds the football for a long time, and then
Yeah,
they take deep shot stuff. I haven't seen Golish do that as much. He's been more willing to establish the run game. And the one thing I think that does make them a little different is they do try to run the football, even with that tempo. A lot of the teams that run tempo, it's 50-50, throw the football, or sometimes even more throwing the football a little bit more. And he is very set on establishing the run and using the RPO game and all that stuff. So I think it just depends on the tempo of the game. And like if you give up a long touchdown drive to Miami, say on Saturday, 11 plays, 75 yards, whatever it is, right? And they take up 4 minutes. Um, it's tough to go out and throw a three and out on top of that. And that's what you got to avoid. And they've been pretty good at that this year. I ran 82 plays at Bama, 2 weeks ago, and ran whatever it said 87 or whatever last week. They're getting their plays in against everybody. So clearly it's
sure.
working so far, and they do a good job too of mixing the screen game in and trying to control things while still being fast. And I think that he's starting to get a little more of a feel, I think, too, for what works for his team and the defense. And yeah, but it's definitely something I'd be cognizant of if I'm Alex Golish going into this game. Like you got to not have your defense on the field for most of the game. You got to be if you're not consistently running the football, maybe you pull it back a little bit. But we'll see. I'm very curious to see what these two teams look like. I'm curious to see if Miami's what we thought they were or what people are projecting going into the season, and if USF is leveled up or not. This is a good time. I mean, if they beat Miami, they jump into the top 25, and they're in a position to maybe get into the playoff if they can run the table in the AAC. For Miami, you're positioning yourself to be a top 10 team, so it's a huge challenge going through the rest of the season. Can Miami take care of business and prove a lot of the doubters that they've had for a long time wrong?
Yeah.
And for USF, can they establish themselves as a power G5 team right now? And that's what's on the table to me when I watch this game. And if it's a close game, I think that's good for USF. I won't speak for Alex Golish doesn't want moral victories, but I think this is a game where on paper you're overmatched. So whatever you do in the positive, I think is good momentum building into league play.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this game you will see who is really real here. If that Alabama game was a fluke or not, or if Miami's first three games are indeed a soft schedule, if they struggle against USF on the road. We'll find out Saturday night. Wanted to get your opinion on the playmakers that USF has as well. Obviously, with a fast-paced offense, you assume that there's kind of some fast players as well that can get out and in space and make plays. Who are some of those players that Miami should be concerned with going into Saturday?
I touched on a couple of them earlier. The three running backs last week, they had they ran for like 300 something yards. I can't remember the exact number right now, but like it was like 170 of the yards or more were non-contact yards before contact. They
Wow.
had like three long touchdowns where guys just cut and were untouched. And it's Kelly Joyner, Teron Keith, and Naquan Wright, who came from Florida.
Yeah,
Keith came
Naquan
from
Wright is a South Florida alum for sure.
yeah, and then Teron Keith came from Bowling Green this past off season, and Joyner was a guy that naturally they inherited at USF. Those three guys are really talented, dynamic in that game. Sean Atkins, their veteran slot guy, is steady Eddie out there. He's not going to thrill you with his speed or whatever, but he just catches the ball, makes plays. Ironically, he had a drop in the I think it was the Alabama game that was kind of a costly play, but he's been very consistent for them. they're still figuring out the outside receiver things. On the defense, they've had quite a few guys that have really stepped up. Mac Harris is that linebacker has really stepped up and been big. We'll see about Jalen Schuler if he's back this week or not. I'm not sure. The other linebacker, he's been out the last 2 games. They've had some nice play from their defensive linemen getting in there. DJ Harris is a guy's come off the bench a lot and made plays for them. Darius Hawthorne. There's just a bunch of different guys, but their corners have really impressed me. Deshaun Rucker and Brent Austin, who were 2 transfer guys they brought in. And they've been very good in coverage and just being put on an island at times and making plays and being confident back there. And I think that's a big difference for them. They really struggled in the secondary, and that was where they got torched last year. And they went out and made moves to fix that. And they have some really talented guys in that group that I think are going to be, able to match up hopefully for USF's end with some of Miami's receivers, because Miami has some really good skilled players. And I think that's what it'll come down to on that defensive side. Can those corners cover the Miami receivers? Can they cover the slot guy? And then how does that, can they make Cam Ward a little more, have to really work for it? So that'll be what, matters. They got to be able to get to Cam to affect him as well, and get some pressure on him. And that's where the game gets interesting. They've been really good at it in the first 3 games. We'll see if they can continue that trend this week with a pretty talented team. But, the other thing I point to with the Alabama game is Alabama had shifted their entire O-line because of some injuries. So
Mhm.
what do you glean from that? Is that something that factors into why they had more success in that game too? So all different things to look at, but I think it's going to be exciting to see which version of this team shows up on Saturday. And I don't know if you know this, but they opened up our deck in the stadium for like the first time in forever for this game, so it should be a really big crowd at Ray J, and a nice environment for a college football game, which is exciting for both these teams. I think it sucks to go, even if you're a road team, to go to, we've you've probably been to Duke, to go to like Duke on the road, right? Like, and no offense to Duke, I'm originally from Durham. My mom worked at Duke University, so
Okay.
it's not a shot against them, but it's like,
It's a
um,
tiny stadium.
it's a tiny stadium with a very small crowd most of the time. They'll have,
Yeah.
5,000 people. And, obviously Miami's had their issues drawn when the seasons go sideways and stuff. And so they know what it's like to, and USF's played in a lot of games where there hasn't been a great crowd at home. So it's
Right.
encouraging to see people getting excited. There'll be a huge amount of students at this game.
Hmm.
So it's an opportunity for them to show up. And I'm curious how many people Miami brings. Miami is one of the better traveling ACC teams. So
Yeah.
what's that crowd look like? Because there's tons of Canes fans all across South Florida that
Right.
can. This might be an easier game for if you're in, Sarasota. It's an easier game for you to go to than to drive um, to Miami Gardens or whatever.
Yeah, 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 absolutely. I'm really excited to see that. That's very good tidbit of opening up the deck for the fans over there. I'm sure they'll be juiced up for this one, especially it being a 7 o'clock start. When it's all said and done, though, Kelly, at the end of the night, which I'm sure will probably end maybe close to midnight, what do you think you'll see on that final scoreboard? Before you do that, I just want to say Miami is a 16-point favorite, road favorite in this game. Usually, when that happens, as of late, Miami usually does not cover in those situations. But this is a different team, obviously, with a different quarterback and a different staff, and I think, quite frankly, just a different mentality and culture overall. You're kind of feeling from this team. They consistently are communicating this 1-0 mentality, and it really seems to have bought in with the players. So I don't, of course, I don't think they're really looking at the spread or anything. I think they're just concentrating on what they need to concentrate on to beat South Florida and to move on to 4-0 and continue that momentum going into ACC play the following week against Virginia Tech. But yeah, if you had to predict the final for this game, what would it be?
I would say my gut feeling. I wrote this down while you were talking, just to like my gut reaction because I hadn't thought about it yet. Is I think USF covers. The number in my head is Miami 38, USF 27. Um,
Okay.
I think it's a close game for 3 quarters, and I think it will be closer than the spread. Obviously, if it's 16 and a half or whatever it is, then that's more like 19 on the road, like for a road team. So I think USF's a little bit better than people give them credit for, and I think Miami right now looks like a really good team. And I think there's probably a little more doubt on them just because of the struggles over the years,
Right.
than if and Florida being bad. So, and there's a lot of these teams right now in the ACC too, and you look around like you don't know kind of what they are. Louisville's another one like that hasn't really played anyone yet. So like I think everyone's curious to see who's really good and who's not, and
Yeah.
I think it'll be a game though. I'm not expecting a blowout either way. I don't. I would be surprised if USF won, but it wouldn't be the most surprising thing that's happened this season in college football for sure. So it's been a weird year too. That's the other thing, and that's the one thing I tell fans every week, man. There's a lot of parity now in the game, and so like anybody, short of just being overmatched, like a Ball State, like most of these games are pretty close
Yeah.
week to week. So and there's usually a point where someone pulls away. For USF at Alabama, it happened with 6 minutes left in the game. But in other games, it might happen at halftime or whatever. There's a lot of these games that have been close through the first half, and then things shift after everyone makes their adjustments. So we'll see what happens. I'm like super curious about it though. But it seems like Miami's got a little bit of their swag back. USF has their swag back a little bit. So that's good to see, man, for both programs. I think it's an exciting time if you're a fan of either program to watch how what these coaches are doing with fun quarterbacks that are good leaders of their program. So I expect a good game on Saturday.
I agree with you. I expect this to be a closer than experts think type of game because the 16 points, I think it's going to be right around there, to be honest, as far as the margin of victory. I do think Miami's going to pull away in this game late. It could be very similar to that Alabama game where it was a close game throughout 3 quarters, and then fourth quarter is finally when we'll see Miami turn it on. I'm curious to see how Miami handles adversity, because to be honest, they didn't really go through much adversity in the swamp at Florida, where you would think there would be some adversity there. I mean, aside from that long touchdown run that they gave up, which made it somewhat of a close game, they didn't really face any adversity this season, and they haven't trailed, yet. So it's like you just kind of want to see how they handle adversity, how they handle the crowd going crazy on third downs, when the game is close or tight in the second half, which I kind of expect it to be because South Florida's got a formula to kind of beat a big name team. Miami ranked 8th in the country. I think they have the blueprint, I guess you could say, to beat a big name team with, the high tempo offense, controlling the ball with the running game. The other factor would be just the run defense. Can they, stop the run? And if you have those 3 things, I mean, you pretty much have a formula to upset anybody. So it'll be really interesting to see if they can execute on those phases and if Miami can handle the adversity. But I do think Miami kind of pulls away late. I say it's a 38-21 type of game. I do expect USF to get on the board. I wouldn't be surprised if they held the lead. I wouldn't be surprised if they held the lead at half, to be honest. Just because there's just a lot that Miami will have to kind of deal with as far as their offense is concerned with the high tempo and the running game. So we'll circle back maybe and see, how we did. Kelly Quinlan, for those that know, also covers Georgia Tech. So Kelly and I will meet again once
Was that in November? Is that when that
yeah,
was?
yeah, it's sometime in November. I think it's maybe the third to last game of the season. So we'll circle back again for another edition of Scouting the Opponent. Thanks for joining me today, man. I really appreciate you taking the time just to talk a little football with this game coming up Saturday night.
I appreciate you. Thanks, Marcus, for having me.
No problem. Once again, Kelly Quinlan joining me from bullsinsider.com, also part of the rivals.com network. That's going to wrap it up for the Storm Tracker podcast. I am Marcus Benjamin, publisher of CanesCounty.com. Make sure you subscribe to the website. Use the promo code Miami30 for the first 30 days for free. Also subscribe to this YouTube channel, live from Canes County, and also subscribe to this podcast on all platforms. Until the next episode.